We're talking about EU foreign affairs today and the militarisation of the development aid budget. Joining me today is Petras A, Lithuanian MEP with the Liberals, and Tamas M from the Greens, from Hungary also. Let's start with this new arrangement, the militarisation of the development aid budget. Is it going to go ahead?
Well, I think we should recognize and admit that sometimes and in many instances the development assistance policy of the European Union is short of reaching goals established. I mean, lack of security on the ground, I mean, lack of administrative capacities in third countries do not allow the European Union to reach its development goals. So that's why we must have an extra instrument to reach out those areas, those countries, and to provide certain security environment and to provide certain support for security actors, not lethal weaponry, ammunition, but certain means which might provide a guarantee that the next step, meaning development assistance programs, will be effectively implemented in those countries to change the situation for better.
So basically the tools to get the job done.
Indeed. I mean, I think this is something what might complete the picture. And well, I support this decision because, I mean, we have to develop our instrumentarium along with the changing situation in our neighborhood.
Tamas M, in your party, this wouldn't be the universal view, would it?
Certainly not, and actually there are good reasons for not thinking along these lines. Although there are very few who would question that indeed administrative capacity and general state capacity is missing in these target countries, and indeed there is a security problem to be resolved. What we are questioning is why we're using development fund money for these purposes when we have a number of other potential sources for this. So had it been a separate fund especially for developing countries' security regime developments, we would be much more fine with it than actually reducing the available development aid in order to enhance first the security. So we have enough money. We are the largest donor unit in the world.
Neutrality, though, because of countries like Sweden, for example, and Ireland, or is this an element of simply the encroachment of a type of policy that doesn't have legal basis? That's obviously part of the story. So there is a questionable legal basis to it, which might easily be challenged in the European Court of Justice. But the bigger point is not simply the legality. Even if a way would be found for that, the point is that development money, if targeted well and administered well, those are big question marks, I know, in many of these regions. But nevertheless, if it is done properly, it is able to contribute to eliminating the root causes. Whereas the security scenario is just a tool in order to prevent something from happening. That does nothing about the root causes of migration in the first place. Petras, do you think this policy has been mishandled in the sense that if it goes forward too quickly, the legal basis isn't secure, it goes to the European Court of Justice and is overturned? That looks bad for everybody.
Well, but we should be very clear. I mean, the discussion started in 2014. We had enough time for political exchange, I mean, on all those issues. Now we have interinstitutional decision, which is a very solid base for implementing this policy line. I do not reject the possibility it might be legally challenged by some. Maybe it's good, I mean, to have it before rather than later. But from a practical point of view, I think we really lack this instrument in order to be more efficient in developing policy area. We do. I mean, we provide very solid development assistance to the third countries in the world. So there is enough money in this budget. I agree politically it might be sensitive, I mean, to take money from the development assistance fund, but this is for good of third countries. I mean, if we come with the ability to implement our goals and to secure that development assistance projects will be really targeted and finally implemented, then it's a good
Is there a sense that this is really the maturing of the European Union, that if we can't back up our policies with force, we're not a big player on the global stage?
That is certainly part of it. And I don't think there won't be a majority in Parliament which would support this. The problem, however, still seems to be that if you're playing in three directions simultaneously politically, that's never or very rarely leads to an optimal outcome. And if you're playing both for those who want to have more development aid, for those who want more security, and for those simultaneously who want absolute fiscal tightness around the EU budget, it's an unsolvable triangle.
Are you confident that the legal services of the institutions have played an even hand here, fair hand here, or have they been politically influenced, given that the Council, the Commission and the Parliament's legal services all said this wasn't viable within the Treaty of the European Union, and now there's been a change of heart? And we're not talking about a 20-year shift of policy, this is within 18 months.
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, this pretty much depends on whether it's going to be challenged in the ECJ, what would be the ruling of the ECJ, whether it would serve as a precedent further on, and that's a further question of the interpretation of the ECJ ruling, actually. So I think that's at least 3 steps away yet. So it could be, but that's...
So it's not game over yet?
No, it's not really over, but good thing that we had a political agreement. I mean, now time, to clarify to what extent it does not contradict to the existing treaties, but, from my perspective, this decision might contribute to the European Union role as a global and effective player. I mean, in our neighborhood, we do lack this ability. So, God helps us, to go and to clean up this situation as soon as possible.
Let's talk about Ukraine in terms of our neighborhood as well. What stage is Ukraine at? We see some of the Ukrainian troops moving back into Donbass and places like this. Is there progress, or is it still stalemate?
It's a situation which we saw, probably a year ago. It's almost the same, although we see a certain increase in intensity of shellings from the occupied territories, which is a very worrisome. Shellings are on daily basis. People killed and wounded on both sides, civilians included. It's a kind of very black kind of daily scenario we see. Well, unfortunately, EU and even NATO is not able, to make
able or willing?
Willingness. I think some countries, some member states, are more willing than others, and able probably to supply even some ammunition to the Ukrainian side. And we have to agree that Ukraine stands against the aggression from the most powerful European army, as the Russian army is for the time of being. So I think this is by United Nations Charter. It's a responsibility for us, to assist a country under aggression. But I see the conflict going to become even more protracted, not frozen conflict, really, ongoing conflict, but hopefully our support to Ukraine as an associated member of the European Union will be more and more tangible.
Tamas, do you see Europe playing the strong hand that it could play, or is it letting this drift?
Well, there are 2 sides to this. One is that to put it bluntly, the amount of money we put into this is much larger than anyone else. For sure. And nevertheless, still in large parts of the Ukraine, or especially in Kiev, if you go there, you would see all sorts of posters which signal American aid. And
first, yes.
They're nowhere near the money we are spending on it. Sometimes we do stopgap operations economically, which are usually huge without visible success, but without that the whole budget would collapse. We do direct macro-financial assistance, which I personally believe is generally a bad idea, but nevertheless in some cases it is justifiable. But nobody recognizes that we put actually billions.
But these seem like long-term seed investments which we won't see any real return on for years as the economy matures and the attitude changes.
So part of it is simply a question of PR. We have just a bad press all around the eastern neighborhood. At least we should be able to put forward that this is what we are doing. Okay. And after that you can reasonably evaluate whether that's too much, too little, in what direction, in what way. I don't think we could do much more economically than what we're doing.
There are some good news. For example, just recently I visited very eastern parts of Ukraine, Avdiivka and Kremina, some really very distant places from Kiev. And finally I saw stickers with the EU flag. It looks like, I mean, we recognize that we have to be present since we finance very concrete projects establishing and helping SMEs. Some very small ones, family-based business, reconstructing, rebuilding bridges, for example. And the European Union's big part of the budget and support to Ukraine goes through the United Nations Development Program. So here, I mean, we see United Nations, I mean, symbols present.
This helps support internally, but it doesn't really do anything in the face of Russia with Putin. Medvedev was here in this house for Chancellor Kohl's funeral, and he spoke about the long history, and he indicated something about the future pattern that EU-Russia relations could take. Did you take anything from his words?
Well, I think, I mean, by deciding, I mean, what kind of support and to what extent we should support Ukraine, there was a kind of sensitivity towards relations with Russia. I mean, Russians do have the impact on some European parties, maybe governments, let's be frank. And so, I mean, not to be too much visible. That was the task of some countries which, well, I mean, pretended to be less, you know, engaged into assisting Ukraine in, I mean, to withstand Russian aggression. I think we should choose right sides, first of all, I mean, and to decide who is who. And when it's done, I see a good pattern for supporting Ukraine. We are well present with the advancing reforms in Ukraine, and probably this is the best what we can do on the administration line, but I would advocate for more support in supporting Ukraine militaries.
Do you take anything from Medvedev talking about a softening of relations in the future, or is this just more PR?
Well, first of all of it is PR. I mean, this is how the Russian government operates for the last 2 or 3 years, obviously, and even before that. Most of it was for particular consumption of particular groups. However, I think it is important to note that at this point it has not yet been decided, clarified, that we are not yet at the point where we can say whether it's the EU which has a Russia policy or its member states which have not entirely harmonized Russia policies. And that's a crucial question which we can't put off for a long period of time. We have a couple of years to decide that, but that's it.
Medvedev spoke about the trust, that Chancellor Kohl was someone that Russia trusted. Is trust a currency which is even on the market anymore?
I mean, if you see the behavior of and the policy line of the Russian Federation, I see any engagement in implementing Minsk agreements. I mean, this is probably, I mean, the document we have, or 2 documents we have, and there is no willingness, either really engagement into implementing obligations taken by the Russian side and us and Ukraine. So that's why, as long as it remains kind of strategic line of President Putin, and probably he is the major actor in this conflict. I mean, he is personally involved. I mean, this is very important, and foreign policy in Russia is taken as a decisive factor for his success and probably next run-up for presidency. So that's why I think we should be very clear on commitments taken and asking them to implement. As long as they implement, credibility might come.
Let's talk about Turkey.
May I just have
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Because this is often overlooked, that the Minsk agreement actually was designed not to be directly implementable. That was the whole idea on the Russian side.
Yes.
It basically came without a sequencing scenario. So and once you have this complex arrangement where both sides should deliver, but you don't know who should start, that is actually a recipe for not doing anything about it, unless there is complete willingness on one side or the other.
Is there a case for going back to review and to agree those steps which are missing?
Well, I'm not sure this is the right time for it, but without that, the Minsk agreement is not going to be implemented at any point in time.
Okay, let's talk about Turkey then. Erdogan hasn't really changed his tune at all towards Europe, despite endless commissioners going to visit. We have another 2 going this week, and all the criticism. And we just seem to be in this position of paying Turkey to keep our migrants, and with Italy under more pressure, that's going to continue. Do you see any change of pattern here?
Not really. I think that was a bad idea from the very beginning. The original deal, although I understand the impetus for it at the time when it was made, with the 3 billion infusion and direct transfer in exchange for stopping migration, was a badly conceived idea. But I understand the urge there. Not revisiting it now, I think, is also a bad idea.
Okay. Do you think we should revisit this? Is there some other way through?
Well, I mean, from the very start, it was a risky business for the European Union. I mean, once we provide the financial assistance in return to certain actions towards refugee flows. But, I mean, we know the democratic criteria, which is under such a pressure in Turkey. So that's why it's a very risky, I'm not sure, I mean, a delivery-based approach from the EU, but do we have any alternative for the time of being? Probably we should sustain. And I mean, the message we're going to send to Turkey, as long as referendum results on constitutional change will be implemented, I mean, meaning the freeze of accession negotiations, it's very powerful. I mean, let's see to what extent we will go further on. I mean, implementation of this.
Does President Erdogan care?
I think he does. I think
Why?
he does. Why? I mean, I think this is a general image of his power. I don't believe that he is, I mean, completely, you know, I mean, denial-based towards relations with Europe. I mean, Europe remains to be an important political and economic partner for Turkey. I don't believe, I mean, they can turn around and to deny all the well-established contacts we have.
If that's the case, are we being too slow to act?
In this particular case, no, I don't think so. I think Turkey will be at the crossroads very soon. I mean, Erdogan originally tried a particular type of leadership with which he wanted to build a model third way, Muslim majority Middle Eastern state. It failed. It didn't work out. He didn't become the ultimate regional leader for Islam in the region. I think he's trying for something else, but he couldn't find the actual solution to that problem. And I think we can't provide him with that one. He would need to figure it out for himself, okay. And that would be the time when we can seriously engage with
Finally, let's take a quick look at our friend across the Atlantic, President Trump, who's in Poland this week. Do you see a major impact from Trump's policies in Europe now that the French elections are over, the German elections seem more or less settled? Has he lost any real influence here?
Well, I mean, interestingly, I think the very direct impact from the Trump presidency is a certain wake-up on the European side when it comes to defense policy and our commitments to NATO. I mean, here, I admit, I mean, Trump was right. I mean, we probably didn't take it too seriously, and we looked always, I mean, for guarantees across Atlantic. Now, time, I mean, to act on both sides. Here I see a positive move. I appreciate the presence, increased presence of U.S. troops in more eastern flanks NATO countries, but the political impact still to be seen. I hope Trump's visit to Poland will not over-support the Kaczynski party policy line in Poland. I'm sure, I mean, Poland needs a very pro-democracy-based ruling coalition, so that's why let's see what kind of the lesson the local politicians will take.
Has Trump been vaccinated against in Europe?
I think to a certain degree, yes. So just too many contradicting messages coming out within a week's time, within a month's time, is actually desensitizing almost the entire reading public in Europe. But the point here, if we come back to defense, on which I basically agree that this was in some sense a wake-up call, but we should not overplay the issue as if it was a question of money, and this is the way Trump usually posits it. The problem is fundamentally not that we're not spending enough on defense, we spend it in the wrong way, and that these are fundamentally different stories. Very difficult to make it into a tweet. Probably, but nevertheless, this is slightly more important than the actual 2% spent or not spent in the member states.
That's all we have time for today. Let me thank our guests, Tamas M and Petras A.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Maguire.